Hello everyone, it's Thursday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping met earlier this week at a global summit celebrating 10 years of Xi's signature foreign and economic policy, the Belt and Road Initiative. The two leaders agreed that outside factors such as war and conflict are common threats that are only strengthening Russian-Chinese cooperation. Such a boost in ties is not only seen between Russia and China, but with Russia and North Korea, with a suspected arms transfer between the two having been reported several times. What should South Korea's diplomatic strategy be amid such a deepening relationship between China, North Korea, and Russia? For more on this, we have invited Professor Ban Kil-joo from the Ilmin International Relations Institute at Korea University. Professor Ban, welcome.
Good evening. Pleased to be here.
Good evening. And we also welcome Professor Mason Richey from Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. Professor Richey, welcome.
Great, thanks for having me.
Thank you for being with us. Now, Professor Ban, first question to you. World leaders have gathered in Beijing for China's Belt and Road Initiative Forum, with Russian President Vladimir Putin also there. Now, before we delve into the details of the Putin-Xi summit, I'd like to start with the very basic question. What is China's Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI?
Sure. That project came to the fore in 2013 when Chinese leader Xi Jinping took power officially. It was named the One Belt, One Road Initiative, OBOR, in 2015 and formalized as a grand policy of China. Then it was renamed the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, in 2016. China highlights the BRI as a global infrastructure development plan as part of the efforts to invest in a number of countries around the world. Belt means the Silk Road economic belt based on overland routes, whereas road refers to 21st century maritime Silk Road. As of right now, China has more than 200 agreements on the BRI with 152 states and 32 international organizations. Meanwhile, as opposed to China's argument, negative images have been mounting in terms of the BRI. First, a debt trap diplomacy is raised, which means the BRI compels poor countries to face international hardship due to unsustainable loans for establishing infrastructure projects. Second, the BRI is under criticism because Beijing has sought militarization through the BRI by establishing overseas military bases at ports. Third, the BRI is said to be used for stepping up China's hegemonic challenges because it serves as an opportunity to expand its global influence. In particular, this criticism springs from a worry that Beijing is eager to change a liberal international order into a new one by winning a hegemonic war with Washington. Recently, an appetite for the BRI has been weakened. For example, in August this year, Italy announced a plan to step out of the BRI. However, the BRI still serves as an effective tool for China to be a global power in the sense that more than 150 countries remain in the BRI.
All right, I see. So the BRI is Xi Jinping's signature policy of stitching China closer to the world through massive investments in infrastructure projects. But Professor Richey, as our Professor Ban already mentioned, there were many reports that say it is just debt trap diplomacy. How successful has the BRI been?
Yeah, so to some degree, Professor Khan kind of stole a bit of my thunder. Indeed, when we're looking at the overall success of the BRI, we do have to realize that indeed, they have more than 200 cooperation agreements that they've launched according to their own statistics in 32 international organizations and more than 150 countries, $1 trillion plus in total financial participation so far. So there is, at least top line numbers looking pretty good. You also have a cooperation with Africa, Central America, Southeast Asia, and there are, some successes in terms of ports, high-speed rail, airports, and in that sense, we're expecting that there will be some growth that comes out of this, but at what price? And so indeed, when you look at the infrastructure loans, there's a thought that this is leading to unsustainable debt. There's a certain way of thinking in which this is a sort of cynical reading in which that's intentional. And ultimately, I think it's hard to escape the reality that ultimately the BRI is a framework for Chinese geopolitical influence and not a true development scheme.
All right, I see. Well, now to the highlight, which is Putin-Xi summit. So Professor Ban, they met in Beijing at a time when geopolitical fault lines have been hardened globally. What did their first meeting in 7 months hint at?
Well, as you noted, the emergence of geopolitical fault lines encourages Putin and Xi to get together because it serves as a good momentum for them to step up their coordinated efforts to set new rules in the world. In more detail, I see this summit with 3 points. First, the China and Russia summit shows that Beijing sees the Russian-Ukraine war differently from the international society. Free war, in particular, U.S. President Biden defined Putin as a war criminal. By contrast, this meeting shows that President Xi treats Putin as a political leader of a normal country while staying away from the recognition of Putin as a war criminal. What that means is that China will continue its ambiguous position in this war while taking advantage of this event as a golden opportunity to seize the initiative of the new Cold War. Second, this summit shows that China does not care about the international society's concern seriously regarding a hidden arms deal between Russia and North Korea, which is against international rules. This mentality is based upon their shared common goals as a revisionists, which are countering the United States effectively with coordinated efforts. Third, Putin visited Beijing as part of an effort to reply to President Xi's visit to Moscow in March. Moreover, this is the second time that Putin went overseas after International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Putin. So this summit is intended to show the international society that Russia is winning the war and currently continues diplomacy as usual in an effort to neutralize negative notions against Putin and Russia.
Right, so the summit between Putin and Xi Jinping was indeed significant in many ways. I see that now. Well, Professor Richey, let's delve a little bit deeper into specifics of the results of the summit. Though Putin said in a press conference that he informed Xi Jinping about the situation in Ukraine, no specifics were reported. What could have been discussed between the two regarding the war in Ukraine?
So, one of the things from the academic literature is that, dictators are very distrustful, not only of their own population, but also of other leaders, especially other dictators. They know what it's like to be a dictator, and they know that, it's difficult for them to cooperate with each other. So I have a hard time imagining that the exchange of information between Xi and Putin about the war in Ukraine was particularly in-depth or particularly detailed. I think we have some initial reports that perhaps Putin in February of 2022 informed Xi in advance of what was going to happen in Ukraine, and that Xi asked Putin to put off the attack until after the Beijing Olympics were over. So there may be at least some coordination in this regard, but I don't think that it's very extensive. So in terms of what I think this conversation most recently would have held, I would think probably some basic overview from Putin about the Russian perception of what the state of the war is on the ground, perhaps what Russia's overall objective is, at least with respect to perhaps how that might have changed from the initial objective. What is Russia's end game and exit strategy? And then I think probably also the last two things that they would want to talk about are what sorts of cooperation, notably economically, might be possible between China and Russia to keep Russia from being so isolated and therefore perhaps destabilized, while giving China economic benefits on the other side. And then, of course, what is the situation with Russia's munitions and perhaps what the effect has been of this deal between Russia and North Korea, in which Russia seems to be receiving weapons transfers coming in from Pyongyang.
All right, I see. So Putin might have talked about the basic overview on the word to Xi Jinping. I see. Now, Professor Ban, the conflict in the Middle East was, of course, included on the agenda as well. The two leaders discussed the matter, but again, specific details were not released. Given that China recently said Israel's actions have gone beyond the scope of self-defense, and Russia too called for a ceasefire, but without explicitly condemning Hamas, could we say that they are indirectly supporting Hamas right now?
Well, their behavior looks ambiguous, but it seems clear to me that they are reluctant to fully support the self-defense of Israel and condemn Hamas. The question is why? All issues in the new Cold War, including real wars, have a tendency to be divided between democracies and autocracies. The United States condemned Hamas and announced the full support of Israel because the former attacked the latter preventively, breaking international rules. That's why President Biden visited Israel today while canceling all other schedules. Meanwhile, China and Russia, as I said earlier, are reluctant to condemn Hamas while staying away from the United States position because they believe that this behavior is helpful for gaining benefits out of this war. Breaking rules does not seem to work as an indicator of who should be blamed from the viewpoint of China and Russia under the new Cold War mentality. Well, prior to the new Cold War, the international society generally agreed with the need to put more emphasis on resolving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. In part of doing that, a two-state solution was proposed methodologically. However, the new Cold War made this issue even more divided. As of right now, China and Russia are more enthusiastic about maximizing their interests and seizing the initiative of great power politics against the United States. To that end, both states seem to believe that making the issue divided is advantageous to coordinated efforts with the international society to punish Hamas and guarantee the self-defense of Israel. Regardless of this great power politics, it is also true that the self-defense of Israel should be guaranteed, but at the same time, it should not be overly executed. Both states seem to take advantage of this dilemma from the coexistence of these 2 points.
Right, I see. Now, based on what Professor Ban talked about, Professor Richey, how might the positions of Russia and China on the issue affect the Israel-Hamas conflict in any way?
Well, to start with China, I think it's interesting, and I think the professor just sort of hinted at this, how China has actually seen some improving relations with Israel in recent years. And it is a bit interesting to see how China seems to have not been, frankly, very supportive of Israel. In fact, at least as of the time that we've gone on air, China has actually said very little during this BRI 10-year celebration about what's happened in the Middle East, and at best seems like it's watching the situation to see what impact it might have on regional stability and relations with Iran and the Gulf Arab states. Turning to Russia, presumably Russia tacitly supports Iran and Syria in their support of Hamas, as the logic would be that it would distract, or this ongoing conflict would potentially distract the U.S. From its full-throated support for Ukraine, and that this additional front, let's say, in terms of a conflict that the U.S. administration and under Biden feels like it needs to confront, would be more likely to cause U.S. support to decline, for instance, vis-a-vis Ukraine. So I think that might be one of the ways that Russia sorts of looks at this. That being said, I don't necessarily think it's the case that Russia wants total chaos either.
Right, I see your point. Now, Professor Ban, we cannot leave out economy, and so Putin noted that bilateral trade is on track to pass a record $200 billion this year, and underscored the importance of much closer policy coordination. How are the two economically supporting each other, and what further mutual partnerships could be made?
To put it simply, their mutual partnership looks strategic, simply beyond temporal or tactical levels. Based upon prior agreements, we can trace how they are scheduled to develop this economic partnership further. Earlier in March, two leaders, Putin and Xi, agreed on multi-layered economic and trade cooperation at a strategic level, focusing on strengthening cross-border linkage. In particular, they clarified it with 8 areas. First, they agreed to develop an innovative cooperation model, including a digital economy and sustainable development. Second, they highlighted the linkage between their distribution system by making the best of their transporting system. Third, currency cooperation is getting stronger by stepping up the use of currencies of both countries. Fourth, they agreed to strengthen the energy cooperation partnership. The others include cooperation for mineral resources, technologies, new industrial networks, and agriculture. Thus, these multi-layered economic cooperations seem to be discussed again and clarified more in this summit. Meanwhile, this type of economic cooperation is opposed to sanctions against Russia by the free world. So this is a ripple effect of no function of UN Security Council in the sense that any sanctions were not made due to the status of Russia as a permanent member despite its invasion of Ukraine. This economic cooperation allows any unilateral or multilateral sanctions against Russia to be neutralized.
All right, I see. Though strategic it seems the scope of the economic partnership between Russia and China is getting wider. Now, Professor Richey, we also need to tap into strengthening ties between Russia and North Korea. The boosting of the partnership between Moscow and Pyongyang is evident given the fact 2 Russian ships made at least 5 round trips between the two beginning in mid-August. As far as I know, this was even before the Vostochny summit took place. What does this hint at?
Yeah, so this obviously means that there's some cooperation going on militarily that is going to provide at least a marginal benefit for Russia in terms of the resupply of munition and notably most likely artillery. This marginal benefit for Russia, and maybe it could be even a little bit more than marginal for its ability to continue to execute the war in Ukraine. It really allows Russia to be able to deal with some of the munition attrition problems that it's been facing. On the North Korean side, it's going to probably get various forms of assistance. We're not exactly quite sure what that's going to be. Presumably, there's some food assistance built into that, perhaps some energy assistance built into that, and then of course there's various military technologies that Russia has mastered that North Korea would also like to have, notably, for instance, including satellite technology. So I think that we're seeing some budding increase in cooperation. That being said, I think it's relatively opportunistic, and whether or not this is sustainable and turns into a larger sort of element of bloc cooperation over the long term is a separate question.
Right. I mean, ties between Russia and North Korea is indeed getting stronger and stronger. I mean, even the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov visited North Korea right now. Now, Professor Richey, that makes me wonder, how does China view this strengthening of Moscow and Pyongyang ties?
Yeah, this is a very interesting question, and I've been in meetings, with experts and analysts, both in the think tank world, but also in the government world, who are asking themselves this question. There was a period in time, some years ago, where there seemed to be a sort of tacit agreement between Russia and China, where Russia essentially was allowing itself to be the junior partner in East Asia in exchange for China, allowing Russia's proclivities in Europe to take place, and Central Asia was a little bit sort of unknown in terms of who was going to have more authority there. It seems like it's increasingly China, but it does seem like perhaps Russia's gone back a little bit on that insofar as it's deepened its ties with Pyongyang, and I wonder to what degree, in fact, China might be somewhat irritated by that. China obviously looks at North Korea like a problem in part, just like a lot of other countries do. It's a difficult to manage situation even for China, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's very happy to have Russia come into a relationship that China has been relatively dominating over the last several decades.
All right, I see your point. Now, we are running out of time, but I'd like to ask this last question to our Professor Ban. Amid strengthening ties between Russia, North Korea, and even China, what should South Korea's diplomatic strategy be, in your opinion?
Well, I believe South Korea needs to come up with a diplomatic strategy in a multinational, multi-dimensional way. First, South Korea needs to step up its solidarity with an ally and a security partner. A typical example is going to be the ROK-US alliance and the ROK-US-Japan security architecture. In particular, a trilateral architecture between South Korea, the United States, and Japan should not only diversify agendas for cooperation, ranging from military security to economic security, but also making those agendas turn into sustainable policies while not being swayed by the domestic politics of each country. Second, South Korea needs to establish a new multilateral platform for cooperation with like-minded countries. The United States could be included, but a multilateral platform without the United States looks okay as well. Finally, South Korea should articulate how to resume diplomatic talks effectively with non-like-minded countries or revisionists like China and Russia. To that end, the principle of inclusiveness laid out by South Korea's own Indo-Pacific strategy could serve as a relevant benchmark. Similarly, the ROK-Japan-China summit needs to be made as planned to mitigate the new corridor mechanism in the region and make diplomatic relations more flexible.
All right, multidimensional measures should be put in place for South Korea. All right, well, that's all the time we have for today's edition. Thank you, Professor Ban and Professor Richey, for your time and insights. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.